There is a new expanded investment platform that's available to you. We're here to talk to you about the college football playoff. Yeah, it's fake money, so don't get too excited, but there is a lot of opportunities to rise and fall and invest these stocks that are definitely fun and real to us, but maybe not to you. That's Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. We get to start all over. It's postseason stocks, Bill. What could be better than that?
Nothing can be better than that. I do have a question, though, for the logistics of this. So, like, say that there's just a player who clearly there was no stock left to partake in during the regular season.
Mhm.
Are more opportunities now available that we're in the postseason?
Absolutely. And there's not as many games in the postseason, so we're starting
just postseason.
Yeah, it's a clean slate. It should be easier to track, which is great because we don't ever track them anyway. But maybe someone out there will take Berm's advice and come up with a scoring system somewhere down the road. We probably still won't use it because this is just, for educational purposes.
All right. Who gets to go first?
I don't know. Bill's just, you're ready. You're locked in.
Well, I mean, I'll take the opportunity to take the most obvious one if I'm allowed to buy Jeremiah Smith stock, but that's a rather short conversation. Although I was watching the Cincinnati Bengals on Monday night, and Jamar Chase got 18 targets and a rushing attempt in that game, and I thought, there it is. There's the Jeremiah Smith game plan. That's all it has to do.
You're talking about the Bengals on the show, not Berm?
Sorry. Yeah. Mostly because it's a competition now of who gets. I guess we probably should all get a piece of the Jeremiah Smith portfolio as they enter the postseason, because there's just no way after the Michigan game that Ohio State is going to put itself through another game where it doesn't pepper Jeremiah Smith with targets. And it's true of all the receivers, right? But I think a hard lesson was learned. I hope anyway that a hard lesson was learned after that game, that whatever playoff path exists for Ohio State, it must be fueled by the best players on the offense, and those are the receivers. And I think that conversation probably begins with Jeremiah Smith. You could say it begins with Emeka Egbuka. I wouldn't fight you on it too much, but I think Jeremiah is now or should be at least the focal point of the offense moving forward, and in different ways as well. Like, not just hoping you can get him one-on-one and throwing the ball down the field and maybe he makes a crazy play, or maybe you get a defensive pass interference. You're allowed to throw Jeremiah Smith some shorter passes too and let him run. We've talked.
That's allowed.
It is allowed. I've checked. I've double checked the rule book twice. It is allowed. And I just he is far too dangerous with the ball in his hands after the catch to limit him to only deep passing concepts. So whether that is, your favorite play, Austin, the pop pass jet sweep, or getting involved in the run game like we've seen a time or two, throwing in some slants, throwing in some bubbles, however you want to dress it up. That guy needs to be targeted / have the ball in his hands, I think a minimum a dozen times in every game moving forward. And I think Ohio State understands that now after what happened against Michigan. So with that in mind, I'll take whatever's available of the Jeremiah Smith train.
I want to say something about Jeremiah Smith before you double down on the investment, Berm. I'm not suggesting this as an excuse, because there is none for not targeting him in the second half. But I think if you're investing in Jeremiah Smith, you might be getting a healthier version than we saw in the last 2 weeks of the regular season. No one ever came out and said it, and we pointed out the moments against Indiana. It was he could still get up to full speed and go. This is not meant as a justification or excuse for anyone, but I still wonder if we saw 100% healthy version of Jeremiah Smith in the game. And if we didn't, which I don't know that we did, maybe he looks very different against Tennessee.
Yeah. I want to take one sentence Bill said and add 3 words to it and make it more accurate, in my opinion. Bill said, there's no way Ohio State will do what they did against Michigan. And I need to add 3 words, which is right. That's it. Because when you have these weapons, we watched Michigan shaded double coverage to Jeremiah the entire game. There were openings for Carnell Tate the entire game. There was openings for Emeka Egbuka the whole game. There was openings to the tight ends if they wanted to throw to it. And Ohio State, as we've litigated here multiple times, just seemed to do exactly what Michigan wanted them to do on offense, which was exceptionally puzzling. What's fascinating to me is we're in this first week now of the transfer portal being open. We've seen Cam Coleman down at Auburn enter the transfer portal. He was one of the 5-star receivers in the class of 2024 alongside of Jeremiah and Ryan Williams. We've seen Caleb Odom at Alabama enter the transfer portal. Like, I don't know what these receivers are, if they're having conversations like, hey, let's just see what we can do. I think Ohio State fans should be pretty grateful for Jeremiah Smith and the relationship he has with Brian Hartline and Ryan Day. And I think they owe it to themselves and to him to reward him for everything he's done this season, but to reward that loyalty that he has for those guys and his teammates by making him the focal point of the offense. Because as Bill alluded to, when you have a receiver like that, as the Bengals do with Jamar Chase, it doesn't matter if you know they're throwing him the ball. Like, you can just keep doing it and he's going to win 90% of the time. So just don't be afraid to do it. And the Buckeyes are in a really fortunate position because they have 3 of those guys. So there's just no excuse to not be able to get that ball spread around, and it has to start with number 4.
I also think that part of this was an injury concern with Will Howard. We've seen enough games of him, the 11 previous, where he did not look rattled, did not make a ton of bad decisions. Some for sure, although usually out of aggression instead of what I would call confusion, which is the way that he looked, especially coming off of that hit. And I don't think that's going to happen again. Maybe not unless he gets knocked in the head again, in which case throw this out. But I would bet, and I'm going to, on the stock here, of a bounce back for Will Howard. And I know that there are people that think we've been too high on him throughout the duration of the season, and that's up to anybody else's prerogative to evaluate that. I thought he was incredibly good and invaluable to Ohio State through those 11 games, and he was on his way to doing that against Michigan, in my opinion. One early throw notwithstanding, he did not play or see the field well after that. And whether that played into what we're also talking about here with the lack of targets for Jeremiah Smith or Carnell Tate or Emeka Egbuka or anybody else, I think it must have. Now, I think it would maybe behoove somebody at Ohio State to take some accountability for that down the road. And it's not going to be up to Will Howard to do that, because as long as they give him back his helmet, he's going to go in the game, and he was dying to do so. Any player, any leader, any quarterback is going to do everything that he did in that second quarter to get back in the game, but he clearly wasn't himself. And if it impacted Ohio State's play calling enough that they weren't going to throw because they were worried about his health, that's maybe the most damning indictment of the entire plan in the second half. You put your backup in there and be able to throw the football. I'm as confused by that as anything, which is a very long-winded route to saying a healthy Will Howard, I don't think, would make those same mistakes again. And I'm just assuming that he wasn't and projecting that he will be next Saturday against Tennessee.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I would probably buy a little bit of that too. I think Will Howard had a bad day, like Ohio State had a bad day. I don't know that that's indicative of who he is or who he will be for Ohio State in the playoff, because it's not like in the previous big games he didn't show up, right? If he had been shaky against Oregon and Penn State, and I suppose to a lesser extent Indiana, but still that was a big moment. Then I might be more on the were we off base with this guy the whole time train, but that wasn't the case. So I'm willing to. I think he probably deserves some benefit of the doubt that he can bounce back and have a better performance the next time he's on the field.
There's also one outlet that is driving me insane writing about Will Howard when it comes to the playoff, because they keep saying he's had 2 moments that really let Ohio State down, and blaming him for what happened at Oregon, to me, in the last second is insanity. And they've been doing it multiple times, even before the Michigan game. What did he do wrong? He could have got down with 1 more second left. A lot of people have been in those situations before. Was it some sort of mental collapse by Will Howard that he didn't save the 1 second in Oregon, or call any of the plays and waste the time previously, or throw the flag on Jeremiah Smith? I I get so annoyed by things like that because it keeps
That's why you
happening.
shouldn't
repeatedly.
read other people's work.
Oh, that's true.
They're irrelevant. They mean nothing.
I don't. I don't think we should say that.
Oh, sorry. I don't know who you're talking about though, because
I
I
know.
don't read other people's work, especially when it's obviously crappy. Let's.
Well,
go.
you have to have a subscription to this site, and it's owned by the New York Times.
Well, that's all you need to know.
Whoa.
Ohio State's offensive tackles are good, and they've played well, despite the fact that the run game has been a little bit bad in the last couple of weeks. I don't think it's an indictment on Donovan Jackson and Josh Fryer in the run game. I think it's been the problem with moving a new center in there, and then the clearly like something has happened with Tegra Shabola where his productivity has fallen off a cliff in the last month. But I think that this is a game, and I've talked about it a little bit on Sunday, when you're dealing with the Tennessee defensive line. I think that it is a much more edge-oriented defense, and I think that bodes well for Ohio State, as I said earlier this week. And I think you're going to see a really good game from the tackles at Ohio State, and that is vital for what you're talking about, Austin, with Will Howard being able to bounce back and giving him time to throw and getting him the opportunity to actually find the receivers in the game, in the receiving game. And I think that Josh Fryer especially has played pretty well this year without getting a lot of flowers for it. I don't know who or where James Pierce lines up for Tennessee or who he'll line up against, but I really think that is a matchup that maybe Ohio State, I'm not going to say they're going to win it, but I don't think it's one that we should be heading into this game thinking Ohio State can't stack up to what Tennessee's defensive line is when we've watched them play against Oregon and Penn State, and the offensive tackles held up pretty well in those games. So a stock up on the tackles, and I just want to buy a little bit of the what's remaining on Donovan and Josh Fryer.
Yeah, they'll have to put them in advantageous situations, I think, because like you're right that the Penn State game felt sort of like a ripe opportunity for Penn State's speed on the defensive line and athleticism on the defensive line to really show up and change that game. And it didn't, except for the couple of very obvious passing downs where Abdul Carter shot into the backfield like a madman and got a sack. So as long as you can avoid those, not entirely, but at least with consistency and regularity, then I think the tackles could be okay.
I might regret opening up this conversation because I think the end result is that the stock is currently flat with the possibility to go up against Tennessee or in the playoffs. But there's a perception that the stock of Justin Fry has bottomed out and that Ohio State needs to make a move with its offensive line coach that I frankly don't buy. And I think there are plenty of opportunities to criticize that the recruiting overall for the last couple of years has not been to the level that Ohio State needs. Bill, you showed a graphic to us about the makeup of the line going into 2025 as it is currently. Not great, pretty bleak when you're looking at the tackle situation. So certainly what happens in the transfer portal is also going to shade this. But the notion that Justin Fry is not recruiting and not developing, I think, is wildly off base. And I'm going to start. This is like sort of a backhanded compliment. No offensive line coach down to their 8th and 9th options off the bench is really going to have a unit that is going to win a Joe Moore Award. I think by and large, the work that he's got from Austin Sareveld off the bench, what Carson Hinsman has done at guard and center, if not perfect, still pretty good. Earlier in the year, I think I'd been giving him credit for Tegra Shabola, but for the folks that want to say there's no development going on whatsoever, I would present Josh Simmons to you, who Berm did project would be a second-round pick when he came over from San Diego State, but mostly people saw a Mountain West Conference tackle who was one of the most penalized offensive players in the country and not a first-round draft pick. So adding that into the credit that he has been given for work with DeJuan Jones, Berm, you mentioned Josh Fryer, Paris Johnson talking about some of the way that Justin Fry has worked with offensive linemen. I don't think that the notion that there's zero development going on is accurate at all. So is there going to have to be a really good plan to handle Tennessee and a much better execution, maybe even different personnel involved than what happened in the game against Michigan? Of course there is. But I don't I don't view this as like sell everything you possibly have in Justin Fry. I just don't agree with that.
Yeah, I'm torn on it. Go ahead, Berm.
You have to be torn on it. I mean, the results on the recruiting side of things have been mediocre at best. He's not done a good enough job bringing in the numbers that are required at the position. That's indisputable. But what is also indisputable is that he helped turn Josh Simmons into a borderline first round, definitely day 2 pick in the NFL draft. He took a castaway from Alabama at center who everyone in Tuscaloosa is like, thank God this guy's leaving. He stinks. And he should win the Remington Award. He's a finalist with Seth McLaughlin. We'll see if they give it to Cooper Mays at Tennessee or the kid at Western Michigan. But Seth McLaughlin, you can make an argument that he was the most valuable player on this team for Ohio State this year, aside from just the leadership. But the proficiency and the efficiency that he had at center was incredible. I mean, we're talking like a guy who walked in from Alabama and like was the leader of the group. And that says a lot about him, but it also says a lot about Justin Fry for identifying it. And whatever the mental hurdles that Seth McLaughlin had at the end of last year, the Buckeyes, led by Justin Fry, helped eliminate those. And there was not an issue once this season with Seth. So I think you have to give him credit for that. Paris Johnson gives him credit. DeJuan Jones gives him credit. I think we have to remember when he arrived at Ohio State, it was after the class of 2022, which was the Tegra Shabola and Carson Hinsman and George Fitzpatrick. Those guys came in. He got hired in January and had to retain those guys, but those weren't his players. I don't think it's fair to evaluate Justin Fry's ability to develop offensive linemen on this accelerated timeline that we expect every player to be ready to play as a freshman. Like, that's just not real life. I mean, we're in year 2 of Austin Sareveld and Luke Montgomery and Josh Padilla, and we're heading into a college football playoff where I think all 3 of those guys may end up playing a role for Ohio State. If that's the case and they're all doing it at the end of their second year, that's pretty good. I mean, we used to be a proper country that understood offensive line play required 3 or 4 years to get a guy ready to play, and we just don't have that luxury anymore. But I don't think that Justin Fry should be evaluated on the development of those players, and certainly not the development of Ian Moore or the Armstrong twins or Gabe Van Sickle. So like the body of work is not bad for Justin Fry, but it's when you're stacking him up to Brian Hartline and James Laurinaitis and Tim Walton and Larry Johnson's recruiting and even Matt Guerrieri now, like, you ask yourself, like, is that enough? And clearly it's not. But to just say that outright he stinks, he can't get it done, I just don't buy. But Ohio State's going to have to change their philosophy about how you approach the tackle position, because clearly the Buckeyes are still seeing the offensive line as a developmental position, one that you don't pay a premium for a high school senior. You wait until a player has proven themselves either in your program or somewhere else, and then you pay the premium. But maybe that has to change because it's putting Justin Fry in a really bad spot when it comes to high school recruiting.
I think that it at best has been inconsistent. I think it's been more bad than it has been good. Josh Simmons is definitely a plus. I don't know how much of a plus Seth McLaughlin is, because if the conversation about Seth snaps at Alabama was a Jalen Milroe conversation, and Jalen Milroe's on the quarterback here, and otherwise he's a pretty good offensive lineman, like, I don't know. Maybe that's like a half check for Justin Fry. I'm not giving him a full check there. Tegra Shabola's in his 3rd year and hasn't gotten any better throughout the course of the season. Zen Mahalski's in his 4th year and wasn't ready to play when they needed him to play. Like the younger guys, the second-year guys, I definitely agree with that. I think it's too early to tell because all those guys were multi-year developmental players, but the numbers in the room aren't right, and Ohio State's going to have to add 2 or 3 portal tackles because the 3rd and 4th-year players who are supposed to be rising in the starting positions, I think, clearly aren't ready. So I don't know. I think it's mostly bad. I think it's a complicated position to evaluate, and it is evaluated differently than like a receiver position, especially coming out of high school. So there's a lot of projection there, and I think it's easy to be wrong when you're trying to do that. But I don't think it's been good enough, like nearly good enough. So I'm not trying to argue with you guys. I'm just like that's kind of where I am on it.
I want you to argue, but I also I'm not someone who's in the camp of you can't move on from Justin Fry. if Ryan Day decides that's what he wants to do or thinks he should do, then he should do it. Like, that's his job as the head coach. Clearly, the results have not been good enough. Like, that's not really up for debate, I don't think. But I also think that the body of work is hard to evaluate. Like you said, like it is a complicated position, and one that 10 years ago we would look at the results completely differently than we do now, because the game of college football and recruiting and the transfer portal and everything else has changed so much that we're judging. You, as you said, you cannot evaluate offensive line development the same way you do wide receivers or running backs or cornerbacks. Like, it is still a developmental position, and you're seeing a look around college football this week. How many guys are entering the transfer portal as freshmen and sophomores? Like, it is the expectation now is if I don't play right away, I'm leaving, and that is stupid because you shouldn't be playing right away.
I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of the position, like across the sport, probably mostly on the part of the players. It's like, if you're not starting as a freshman, that's normal, brother. Like, you don't need to jump into the transfer portal.
Same as a sophomore.
But then that's, I think when that happens, like that churn at that position seems especially problematic. I think it then impacts the evaluation of like what the position should be across the entire sport, not just at Ohio State.
But I think, and the reason the reason that I brought it up this way is that I like, outside of Ryan Day and how much is tied up into the evaluation of him at the very top and the stakes that he has in the college football playoff, like, I think that Justin Fry could swing the opinion and the analysis of his value or lack of value more than anybody else against Tennessee or in the next week and a half. Because if they land 1 or 2 or 3 portal players in this interim in the next 9-10 days, whatever it's going to be, Berm, someone is coming in by the weekend, right? Like the Thompson,
Josh Thompson from Northwestern.
Yeah. Like, if those guys are signing up to play for Justin Fry, and then they go out and Josh Padilla or Luke Montgomery or George Fitzpatrick or anybody else goes into the lineup and acquits themselves well, and Ohio State has an effective offensive game plan and beats Tennessee, we're not probably going to be having any more of these conversations. But I'm not saying there's not a world where the opposite doesn't happen either.
Yeah. I've said this a few times in the last couple of weeks as the college football season has unfolded. Like, there is fundamentally average football being played everywhere. Like, it is hard to find really good football teams right now in college football. And yeah, Oregon's undefeated, and they're probably the closest thing to like being a great team. Everyone else has major flaws, but around the sport itself, quarterback play and offensive line play in the last 4 years has taken a dramatic step backward. And I think it's just because, as we were talking about, like there's a belief that every one of these kids and their parents have that they now have to play right away. And if they don't, then they're leaving. And like, that is not how you develop in those positions that are 90% about how you understand the game of football and not necessarily how physically ready you are or how far you can throw a football. So like it's, if you look at a guy like Tegra Shabola, like, yeah, he's 6'7" and 340 pounds. So like, he looks like a guy that you should be able to count on, but clearly there's something that's not firing right when it comes to being on the field. And that is a byproduct of a player who maybe at times has put more value on himself than his experience would dictate. And now you have to try to figure out how to balance his improvement with like, well, if you give him if you take him off the field now, like, well, I'm leaving now. Like, then what do you do? Like, it's such a weird time in college football that I don't know that it's going to be the way it used to be ever again, where it's like, okay, you can truly like evaluate what this coach is doing with his position group, because everything is just so fraught with like chaos. But whatever, we can move on.
Okay. Bill, do you have anything else that you're watching?
Yeah. Tyleik Williams, I think it's a similar vein to what you said, Austin, about Jeremiah Smith and not being 100% himself. I don't think Tyleik's been that since. When did he pick up that ankle injury? Was it the Nebraska game around that time? I think. Just very clearly, I like playing through it, but he missed the Purdue game, but playing through it and doing what he can and still playing his normal sort of allotment of snaps, but I think very clearly not impacting the game the way that we're kind of used to seeing from him. So with now, what'll it be? 3-4 weeks between games for him to get kind of healthy and refreshed and a little more energy, I think. And I guess hopefully a game plan that rotates the defensive line a little more than they did against Michigan to help that along. I think you could see maybe the best of Tyleik Williams kind of come back. I thought we were seeing it early on, and then that injury just took a lot out of him, took his burst out of him, I think. And his production's down a little bit. He's also played, I don't know, like not a little more than half of the snaps that he played last year. So that at least helps explain part of it. But that's a guy that just should be a real force in the middle of a defensive line. And I don't know that I'd say he has been. And I think it's understandable why. But now hopefully he'll be healthy and kind of be the Tyleik that he was for all of last year when he was playing like one of the better defensive tackles in the country.
Berm?
I really think it's time for like a big series of games for Quinshon Judkins. So this goes back to the offensive line conversation for me, but we have the expectations around him and Travion Henderson in the same backfield were so high, led by Bill Landis, of course, that
I don't know what you're talking about.
I don't know that they could have ever hit what people thought that they would do, but there's no doubt that Quinshon has looked at times recently extremely frustrated, and it's a credit to him. He's still running as hard as he can. Like you can tell that he's close to really hitting something once or twice a game. And I think that he's a player that has now been kind of relegated into this, like, well, he's a nice, additional piece to the offense, but he's not who you count on. And I think it's time to start counting on Quinshon again. And if Ohio State's going to make a run to the national title, it's going to have to do it using all of its weapons and not just throwing the ball, because there are going to be teams that you face that are going to put you in conflict and pass rush and really get after the quarterback. So I think it's time for a recommitment to the Quinshon as your RB1 and using Travion Henderson in ways that get him the ball in space, and similar to what Ohio State did at Michigan in the first drive of the second half, that little swing pass, that kind of stuff is really where I think Travion can excel. But when it comes down to just handing the ball off and getting upfield, I want to see the Quinshon we saw the last couple of years. And I think that I believe it will happen. So let's just put it that way. I also buy stock in Mylan Graham, not for the playoff, but just in the future.
Do you think Quinshon can get me 22 touchdowns in the next 4 games to make me right on my prediction of 30 for the year?
Seems like a lot, Bill. I don't know if he can get there.
Maybe.
Probably not.
Maybe. I'm going to hold out hope.
Well, yeah, just, put a couple futures bets on it. And if that comes through, then that will be the greatest stock watch of all time. Like it'll be very lucrative for everyone. So maybe don't take gambling advice from us on the stock watch. And I don't know how many actual stocks we talked about on this show, but it was fun anyway to speculate and look forward a little bit to the stakes as the playoff draws closer, because I do think that the excitement level is starting to creep back up as the pages turn from the loss in the game for Ohio State. Maybe not for everyone. Your mileage may vary, but I think the opportunity with the historic matchup with Tennessee coming, an SEC team, a playoff game in the Horseshoe, I think people are starting to rally around that. Tickets go on sale tomorrow to the public, if there are any left. I don't know. We'll see when that actually happens. But another day closer to the playoff, another day closer to Ohio State getting back out there. Thanks for joining us for some modified postseason stocks on the podcast daily. That is Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you later.